So my job in the next few minutes is not to do a sort of Michael Parkinson, but just to be a bit nosy on your behalf. And we find out a little bit about Yvonne's story. When we get to the Bible bit, explaining a bit about the Christian message, I think the point of this first bit is it's quite nice just to hear how the Christian message has impacted a particular person in their life and their own experience. And we're all different, and Yvonne has got a great story to tell. So we're going to sort of rewind the clock quite a few years. We won't ask you exactly how many years. But just tell us a bit about your upbringing, the kind of home you were from, Yvonne.
I was born in North London in a place called Holloway. And my mother always says, tell everyone it wasn't in the prison, and it wasn't. I come from a very large, extended Irish Catholic family. I'm the eldest of two children. I came from a loving home. My mother and father worked very hard, very decent, honest, hard-working people. They were massively emphatic that we should get a good education, and we both did. They worked really hard to ensure that we were well educated. It was a very safe home. There was nothing really traumatic or dramatic in my childhood, and I do say that because often as my story unfolds, people kind of have a peg to put things on that have happened in the past to give a reason for why things turned out the way they did. I don't have that. I have no excuse or explanation for what was to happen.
And what place did God have in your home life as a family?
Well, we were nominal Catholics, I would say. We went to Mass. I made my first confession at 6, Holy Communion shortly afterwards. I was confirmed as a 12-year-old, I think. I'd actually, any childhood belief that I'd had in God had evaporated at a very, very, very young age, an incredibly young age, actually.
And that was because you went to a convent school, is that right? And
yeah.
That put you off big time? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, it sounds so awful, doesn't it? It's that sense of perception. You know, I sat next to a lovely girl called Karen who maintained her faith and still does today, all these years later, and she never had any issues with any of it. And for me, I remember that first confession at the age of 6. And the fear of having to get into a little box and a curtain, and if any of you have experienced or know what that's like, it's quite terrifying for a small child, and being told I had to confess my sins. And we'd learned the 10 Commandments, and I didn't know which of them I'd broken because there was no oxes next door, and my neighbour's wife, I didn't know what they meant, and a lot of the words I didn't understand, and I just made up. I can remember getting into the confession box and just actually telling 3 lies, and because I'd lied to the priest, I can remember coming out and thinking, well, this is it, I'm dead meat now, that's it, I'm toast, I'm gone. And I can remember, given to our fathers and the Hail Mary, and literally coming out of the confession box and thinking that my life is over, I'm a dead person, because that's what God does. You tell a lie and he makes you dead, as a child. And I didn't die. And I remember thinking, I remember that thing straight away. This isn't real. There is no God, because I didn't die from telling a lie. Became a habitual liar as well as many other things.
So fairly early on, you reckon that God wasn't going to feature, didn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely.
And were you one of these sort of apathetic atheists or angry atheists? Where would you be on the spectrum? Angry,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was angry. If you mention God, and as time went on, I kind of towed the line with the family. We went to church, but I had a wonderful ability to be there and not be there. So I could sit in church. I'd count things. I was a great compulsive counter. I'd count the bricks on the wall. I wasn't listening to anything. I'd count the tiles on the floor. I'd count the flowers on the curtains. I'd count bits around the building. I just checked out, really, of anything to do with God. And if anybody spoke to me about God, I just had a real internal angry reaction. I might not have expressed it externally.
And this was, are we into your teen years now? Or?
Yeah, I mean, as it went into my teens, it became, I felt really pitiful that anybody could be foolish enough to believe in God. I just thought that, that life is to to be enjoyed. There is no God. We come from nothing. Life doesn't really mean much other than the meaning that you give to it. And we just spin on into death, and then it's all over.
Yes. What were you like as a teenager?
Oh gosh. I wish my mum was here. No, actually, I'm glad she's not. My mum's still going strong, even despite having lived through raising me. I was a real rebel. Everything that you wouldn't want for a teenage daughter, I pushed every boundary. I was rebellious. I was disobedient. I loved forbidden fruit. If anything, everything that I'd been told, no, don't, shouldn't, mustn't, not a good idea, probably best not to, I just wanted to try it, whatever it was. And that started from probably about the age of 15. That really kicked in when I was kind of that age where I started to make decisions, and they were not wise or good decisions, but I didn't want anybody telling me what to do.
And then when, sort of through your 20s, you had a decade of pretty much continuing that in a big way. Just tell us a bit about life then.
Yeah, well, I'd started drinking in my teens. My drinking started at sort of the age of 15. I drank teenage drinking. It was pretty grim and not very nice, but weekends and parties. But during my 20s, I managed to get a good job. I was good at what I did. And in my early 20s, I worked hard, played hard, and I just wanted to be in what I thought was like the mainstream of life. I didn't want to conform. I could see friends kind of settling down and doing like normal things, and normal to me equaled boring. I went and lived in South America. There was sort of this kind of opportunity arose. It wasn't particularly honest. I'd started taking drugs as well. I started to take cocaine to enable me to drink more because it kept me awake. And the massive ego. I almost didn't want to go to sleep because it was like the world stopped spinning if I went to sleep. So I went and lived in South America. I dated a sort of mini celebrity. He was a racing car driver in South America. He wasn't like a Formula One driver, but I loved it. In my own head, I was like the Cheryl Cole of of Peru, because he was known, and you went to restaurants and people kind of fawned over him, not me, but I kind of got the attention because I was the accessory of the day for a while. My drinking and my drug taking was spiraling. But youth, strong, robust physical health just kept me going. I just kept going, and I would still have said I loved my life. I wasn't questioning my life. I wasn't.
You're pretty happy
doing
all this.
I thought if you asked me what's my life, I would have said happy, carefree. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just doing what I want, and
You had a number of different relationships, though. So in terms of not hurting people, there were a few broken engagements.
There were. Yeah, I loved being a fiancée. If that was like a profession, I could have been a professional fiancée. So I was engaged 4 times altogether. I did marry the lovely fourth man that I married, but the 3 other times, they were these. I would have said, "Oh, I'm a hopeless romantic," but looking back, I suppose it is hindsight. I think I was always looking for something or someone, and I would meet somebody, fall in love very quickly. It wasn't kind of a slow process. Get engaged really quickly, and some of the relationships, a couple of them were really quite toxic. They were not good relationships, not because I had a wonderful capacity to bring the worst out, to bring the best out in people at times, and to bring the worst out in people at times.
Did you keep the rings? You got a little
Well,
box of
I had
rings?
the one that he wanted the ring back was the only one that was really worth any money, and he was the one. The rest, the other 2, they were kind of Argos Elizabeth Duke rings, I think. But the one that was really expensive, he had that one back.
So you said the 4th person you ended up marrying.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to get married rather than carrying on this hedonistic lifestyle in Peru?
Well, I'd come home from Peru, and actually what had happened was in a very short time of coming back from Peru, I would have been 23. I'd hooked back up with an old boyfriend that I'd been with before, and I actually ended up pregnant, and I had a baby. But nothing changed, absolutely nothing changed in my lifestyle. I carried on doing exactly what I was doing. My son is now 35, so he was blessed to have two amazing grandmothers on both sides of the family, two tough little Irish women, and they more or less raised Louis. I mean, I was there as a kind of, I was like an accessory to him, and he was an accessory to me. But my life carried on the same. Having a child didn't change anything that I did, and I was getting nearer and nearer towards 30 by now. But at around the age of 27, I met a lovely, lovely, lovely man. And he was an amazing man. He was kind, he was gentle, he was stable, he was honest. I mean, he was really honest. That was the bit I was like, oh my goodness, you know, he paid his bills on time, he led an honest life, he had his own business and it was an honest business. And he was kind of nothing like the kind of crowd that I'd surrounded myself with for many years. And there was sort of an attraction in that and the stability. He was very stable and predictable, but in a nice way, not in a, you know, and he had lots of money and he took me on Concorde and he took me on all these sort of fancy trips. And I'm like, this is it. I've arrived. Success.
Okay, so you were married, you had a kid from a previous relationship,
Yeah.
good life and so on. But the drinking had sort of been going on in the background.
Yeah.
And just tell us a bit about that. So that got worse during this time, did it?
Yeah, it did, which is bizarre, really, because, you know, I'd met this lovely man. I was still working at that time. I worked throughout my 20s, and I had like, there's an awful lot of effort goes into managing an unmanageable, chaotic life. And I don't know if people, you know the old circus act where the man runs up and down spinning plates on big sticks, and you've got, you know, he has to keep running up. And that was my life. That was kind of a snapshot. I was a very busy, active person, drinking loads, taking copious amounts of drugs, but still presenting a manageable kind of facade to the outside world. And I met Paul, and we got married, and we had, like, you know, this amazing, wonderful wedding. And I do remember on my wedding day thinking, because I had a big, like, frou-frou dress with this massive train and a virgin bride, I remember thinking, don't get too drunk, because, like, falling down in your dress isn't going to look good. You know, the self-obsession of me about me. And I can remember that day managing not to drink during the day, which was quite a feat. I got very drunk in the evening.
What kind of quantities are we talking? What were you drinking by that stage?
Well, I was top up drinking a lot with vodka, because vodka doesn't smell. Vodka smells, believe you me. When you drink any amount of alcohol excessively, you can smell it. So I drank alcohol. Externally, I drank fine white wine, because I'm a very discerning drinker. And my husband's bank account bankrolled fine white wine. So, you know, I became a wine connoisseur with a bottle of vodka in my bag or hidden somewhere.
And things got even worse when you had your second child, is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah, we'd been married for coming up for a year and a half, and I got pregnant, and we were really pleased, and I had our second son, who is now 27, and you know, to my great shame, I drank during my pregnancy, and I know you're not supposed to do that. You know, that's the hold it had over me, and it was quite shameful drinking. I hid a lot of it from people, and it was 27 years ago, and I think, it wouldn't have made any difference. The medical advice that I was given would not have stopped me doing what I did. So I had another baby. We moved to a really nice house in the suburbs. And there were cars, there was foreign holidays, there was clothes and money and stuff, you know, so all the stuff was tick, 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 tick. But I'm gradually going down and down and down. My drug taking was completely secret. My lovely husband was a keep fit fanatic, and he'd never, ever in his whole life even smoked a cigarette. I mean, that's how he was blind to anything that was going on. So I did all that secretly.
It was because you were at home full time now, you
Yeah.
were able to drink a lot more.
Yeah, I was drinking in the morning. I mean, I can remember discovering the hair of the dog because I did suffer from terrible hangovers, and I was just cross I hadn't discovered it before because, when you wake up in the morning and you felt the way I did, a drink was the best cure. It's much better than Resolve and paracetamol and gallons of water. Just have another glass of something and you feel okay again. But unfortunately, that glass led to another glass very quickly. And, my poor husband was coming home from work. He had his own business. He worked very hard. And he was coming home to a drunken wife who was insisting, I'm not drunk. He'd look at me and say, you've been drinking. And I no, I haven't. I'm not drunk. I'm just tired. And I was slurring and staggering.
And by this stage, some of the stuff you were drinking was not the sort of regulation alcohol.
No, well, he'd got a bit cute now, and he took my credit cards away. What a mean man! He took my car keys away. What a horrible man! So kind of he was trying to withdraw all financial means of me getting alcohol. There was no alcohol in the home. So I had to be resourceful. So I drank what they call non-beverage alcohol. I found stuff in the garage. I found stuff in the medicine cabinet. I just drank whatever I could get my hands on, really. It was awful when I look back. And still maintaining a facade of believing I'm in control of this and my life is still fantastic, thank you. And it wasn't, it was a complete mess.
Now, by this stage, your husband obviously did know what was going on.
Yeah.
And did he sort of recommend you get any treatment for it? Did the doctor see you, and what was their view on it?
Oh dear. Yeah, he got in touch with our GP, who's still our GP now, and he spoke to the GP and sent me along to the GP. I think I spent 3 hours getting ready. I looked like I was going to the Oscars by the time I arrived at the GP's. I had like sparkly earrings and lip gloss and a full face of makeup and bouffant hair. And arrived at the GP's just to convince him how well I was. And of course, the GP asked me how much I was drinking. Well, I halved it, quartered it, and it came back as virtually nothing. And he suggested that I should just his words were, try not to drink before 6 p.m. and try to stay away from spirits. So, of course, by the time I got home, I just said to my husband, he said, I'm fine, just carry on. And he gave me a letter for some talking therapy, and I opened it, as you do. And he wrote in the letter, Mrs. Edwards is a charming woman. And I thought, well, of course I am. Do you know what I mean? He gets me. It's that mean husband that's just trying to spoil my fun. And my poor husband was kind of almost painted as the baddie in the picture.
In the end, you went on an AA program.
Yeah, well, that was his husband's idea as well. I don't know, honestly. He just wouldn't leave me alone by this stage. He was just he was grasping at straws, the poor man. So, I'd had talking therapies. I'd had all sorts of stuff that he'd paid for, actually, to try and intervene in my drinking. And eventually he said, you need to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I thought, oh gosh, this is really bad. But if it just gets you off my back and keeps you quiet for a while, I'll go. So I went to Alcoholics Anonymous and people were amazing and they spoke about their drinking. I had no capacity, to be honest. I couldn't even face my own reality. So I sat in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. I spotted all the differences. People weren't arriving in fancy cars like I was, and people had maybe been to jail. Well, I'd never been to jail, and people, all this stuff. I looked for every difference that I could find, and I did stop drinking for a little while just to prove that I could, which was quite miraculous looking back. But in a short space of time, I was drinking again.
Didn't one of the women at AA say something that riled you a bit? What was she saying?
Bitter woman she was. There was a lady at the time who was the age I am now. This is 25 years ago. I was 35, so she would have been about 60. And I remember turning up, and my husband always had really nice cars, so I'd make sure the car was plotted up outside the meeting so they could all see what a fabulous success I am. And I'd always spend hours getting ready to go. And so I arrived at the meeting, and I thought they're really fortunate that I'm here, actually. They didn't see it like that. And this lady said to me, the shop window looks nice, but what's going on in the stockroom? And I was so angry. And I just remember thinking, you nasty, bitter old lady, you're supposed to be kind to new people. I thought if there was someone to report you to, I would. But she was right. She'd seen right through me. She looked at me and she'd seen past the facade of you know, the actress on the stage, the person I was trying to present to the world. She got it.
And the AA program, that helps for a few months and then back to your old ways?
I mean, I didn't really I just went to meetings kind of begrudgingly, and I didn't really want to be there, and I didn't really want to stop drinking, but I did for a little while. And I mean, the reality was that I'd had a gap in my drinking for the first time in a long time. I didn't stop taking drugs, but I did stop drinking alcohol. And I began to look better and feel better, and I wasn't drunk, just not drinking is a great cure for drunkenness, and my drunkenness went out the window, but unfortunately all the other stuff that was wrong with me was still there.
And you ended up in quite a black hole.
Yeah, I did. I mean, it's interesting, that short dry spell, going back to it, it became bleak, black, dark, depressive drinking, and I don't have a depressive personality. I don't have a pessimistic personality. I mean, in God's grace, I've been blessed with an optimistic personality, but even that has to be based in some form of reality, and it never really was. But I began to feel that I really wasn't sure. I loved my children. I always say that because I remember my family were pleading with me to stop what I was doing because I loved my children. And it's that interesting thing that even the greatest love, the power of love for a mother or father for a child was insufficient to stop me. I so wanted not to be who I'd become, and I loved my children, and I couldn't stop drinking, and I just began to think maybe it would be better if I just wasn't here anymore. And it wasn't like the big, I used to do the planning my funeral and how sad everyone was going to be and what all the nice things they'd say about me. It wasn't that anymore, the sort of ego-centered funeral planning. It was just, I don't know if I can continue the painful existence that I'm living, just getting up and trying to get through another day, trying to get drink, trying to hide it, trying to drink it, I'd run out of, the circus spinning the plates, the battery had just run dry.
Yeah. And so one day you thought, well, this is it, and you tried to do something about it.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I came to one morning and I took a massive overdose. I just took whatever was in the medicine cabinet. And
was this a cry for help, or were you generally trying to
No, it wasn't. No, it was because, and I do understand the sort of the cry for help. This wasn't. I'd never attempted anything like that before. The sort of egomaniac in me couldn't believe how the world would continue to spin if I wasn't on the planet anymore. So the thought of suicide or sort of self-harm had never really come across my path. But this particular day, I just couldn't go on anymore, and I didn't want to die, but I couldn't bear the pain of being alive.
Now, clearly it didn't work because you were here. No. So tell us what happened.
Well, I mean, by the grace of the God I don't believe in, I took a massive overdose, and my neighbour, who works at Queen Mary's Hospital, knocked on the door. And normally I didn't answer the door, and I answered the door, and she realised quite quickly something was very wrong, and I was taken to hospital. And I got what I call my economy detox, which was a stomach pump, and I came to on a surgical ward in Queen Mary's Hospital the following morning, and I was defeated. I was absolutely beaten, and I'd remembered what people in Alcoholics Anonymous had said, and they were really big on being honest, on honesty. They talked about God, but I just sideswiped all that. I thought that was an optional extra. When you buy a car and you can have a sunroof, I thought, well, if you want to go to AA and have God, you can pick God, but you don't have to have it. It's up to you. So I kind of left all that to one side, but I remember they'd always emphasise the need to be honest, and because of what I'd done and because of the situation I was in, I sat down opposite a CPN, community psychiatric nurse, and he asked me some questions. And for the first time that I can remember in a long time, I answered every single question with as much honesty as I can imagine, or as I could muster.
So you survived the suicide attempt, you came out of hospital, and then you were sort of recommended for some rehab treatment?
Yeah, well, that was as a result of being honest with the psychiatric nurse. The first thing he said to me is, "You can't go home." He said, "You need to go away somewhere." And I mean, what a blessing! My family needed a break from me, whatever about my needs. They were frazzled and fraught and in complete disarray. The toxic effect of the alcoholic or the addict on the family is horrendous.
And your kids were on the register by now?
Yeah, my lovely boys were on the at-risk register by social services for neglect because I'd been so drunk that my youngest, because I'd had another one as well, so I had 3 children by this stage. My youngest had been left in the car. I'd gone indoors, I'd got drunk, I'd collapsed, and it was probably 92 degrees out, and he'd had heat stroke as a baby. He was a baby. Thank God he survived, but that's the reality of where it took me to.
So the rehab then, you were sent off to a...
I was sent off to rehab, you know, by the graciousness of my husband, and he fought through the insurance, because I was going to go to rehab anyway. But, you know, through the insurance, I was very blessed that I ended up in a private facility over in Hayes in Kent. And it was bank holiday weekend, 1995. And that was.
Yeah, so a lot happened that weekend, but am I right that most people sort of went away for the weekend?
Yeah, there was, because it was a rehab, but a lot of people had been there for a week or two already, and because it was the bank holiday weekend, they kind of run it on a skeletal staff basis. So most people, it's lovely, isn't it? When you pay and it's private, they call you a client instead of a patient. Most clients were sent home for the weekend. So there wasn't really any other people there.
Yeah. And how were you sort of feeling about life at that stage?
I felt quite calm, but I think it was just for the first time in a long time, I had not a single drug or a single bit of alcohol physically in my body, and I didn't want it. I wasn't craving alcohol, and I wasn't trying to think, can I get a phone to phone up the dealer and get some more cocaine? I was just, I was actually, for the first time in a long time, I was quite grateful to be alive.
And were you asking big questions, God questions at this stage?
I kind of started to, because of what the people in Alcoholics Anonymous had told me about God and needing God and needing, you know, and I hadn't listened because I still had that capacity even at 35 to do what I'd done as a child. If somebody started to talk about something that I didn't like the sound of, I could look and nod and appear engaged, but I'd just checked out. I was counting the bricks again. So, but I'd heard people talk about God and how God had worked in their lives, and I actually lived next door to a minister, to the lovely Mr. Payne, who used to come in and talk to me about God. And, I just used to be looking at the clock and thinking, he used to bring me marrows from his allotment, and I was like, I've never cooked a marrow in my life. I didn't know what you do with one, but they were like, oh, thank you, and away he'd go. And he was a delightful man, but I didn't really know what he was going on about, you know.
So you were pretty much on your own this weekend. Everyone else had scarpered. And then you opened the drawer and found a Bible.
Yeah.
Tell us what happened next.
Well, I'd kind of been walking in the grounds, and it was a beautiful, the setting of this facility. It's a psychiatric hospital, you know. It's lovely when it's posh and you call it a treatment centre, but it was a psychiatric hospital. And the grounds were beautiful, and I wasn't allowed to leave the grounds, but I was allowed to wander in the grounds, and I did. And it was August bank holiday, and the weather was actually beautiful. It was sunny, and I just remember I was sort of thinking, I wonder, but not very deeply, because I wasn't a great deep thinker. I'm probably still not, but I did think. I just started to think about life, I suppose, and my life, and how had I ended up like this. And I went back to my room, and I'd opened the drawer, and I would love to say I was looking for a Bible. I really wasn't. I was looking for a woman's magazine. I thought there might be a nice Vogue or a Cosmopolitan. I could pick some clothes, and Paul would buy them for me when I come home, and we'd be happy ever after again. There wasn't a woman's magazine in there. There was a Gideon Bible, and I I took the Bible out, and I knew enough from childhood to know there was an Old Testament and there was a New Testament and there were the Gospels, and I was just, I was flicking through the Bible, and I'm just going to share a little bit about what I came to, if that's all right, because it wasn't actually this Bible. Do you know what? It wasn't this Bible because I was really tempted, and I'm so glad I didn't. I was going to steal it, the Bible from the hospital, after what happened, because I felt like this Bible's got some sort of supernatural power. But I didn't. I went to West Wickham and bought one when they let me go out. But this isn't the one that I bought. But I didn't steal the Bible, so I would like that on record. But I'd kind of, I looked through the Bible, and I just came across a story. And have I got the right bit? Yes, I have. So, and it's, I don't think I actually saw the title, but it's called A Sinful Woman Forgiven. I just want to say that during all the therapy, the talking therapy I had, they were trying to draw something out of me that must have happened for me to end up the way I'd ended up, like childhood trauma, adolescence, something. And there was nothing there. I was almost on the verge of making stuff up about my wicked mother, and she wasn't wicked, she was lovely, or my mean father, and he wasn't mean, he was adorable. I was spoiled and loved, so there was nothing there that had made me become who I'd become other than me and what was in me. And I read this story called A Sinful Woman Forgiven. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And behold, a woman of the city, who was a sinner, so it doesn't mean like she was a city worker with a power suit on, a woman of the city who was a sinner. And as I read those words, it was like a thunderbolt hit me, and I just saw a woman who was a sinner, and I just saw in those words, that's what's wrong with me. That's what's wrong with me. Because there was no explanation, excuse, rational reason for why I'd become what I'd become. And as I read those words, I was like, oh my goodness, that's what's wrong with me. It's no good paying hundreds of pounds for me to go and talk to a therapist and have talking therapy, because that's not my problem. That is not my solution. And when she learned that Jesus was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster flask of ointment, and standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet and anointed them with the ointment. I'm not going to read the rest of the story, because you all will know your Bibles, and I'm sure you can go on and read it. And I knelt by my bed, I bowed my head, and I wept. And I wasn't crying for me, I was crying for what I'd done with the wonderful gift of life that God had given me through Jesus, who I just read about. I didn't know theology, doctrine, I didn't know about salvation, I didn't know about grace and justification. I knew none of that, but I knew this. I saw myself in that woman. And as I read on, and I'm sure you know the story, Jesus turned to the woman and says, your sins, which are many, are forgiven. And that was just like,
can you remember what you said to God as you were kneeling by your bed? What did you pray to him?
I knew God was God, and God was real, and God existed. And I remember saying, God, this is Yvonne, as if I was introducing myself to God and he didn't know me. God, this is Yvonne. And it was just, please help me, please help me. And I'm so sorry. My I know it's the word repentance, but my heartfelt sorrow for what I'd done. It was like my life had kind of played before me, of that air of respectability, which was never really there. That as the lady had said, God had seen right into the soul and the shop window, and there was sin and darkness, and yet in his amazing grace and mercy, he loved me.
So in the story, the woman is forgiven by Jesus, isn't she? Her massive debt of sin.
Yeah.
And so were you aware of that yourself, that as you asked God to forgive you and you said sorry, you were asking for his forgiveness, and did it make any difference? Did you feel, I am forgiven now?
Yes, I did, because I could. But what was so important, I could see that my sin. I saw how sinful I am, and I don't say I was. Just how sinful I am. My sinful nature. I could see my manipulative, selfish, dishonest way of life, the way I'd lived my life and what I'd done with my life. And I was just, my breath was taken away, that, I'd done that for so many years and I was actually still alive. I was still alive and breathing, and God, I could see that God had been there at every step and turn and twist and all of it. And how incredible and amazing is that?
And this was in the evening, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what happened? You went to bed and went to
I
sleep?
did. Do you know what? I was because the immense, just the knowledge that God is God and God is who He says He is, and it's quite childlike, but that was just where I was at. God is real. God is who He says He is. Jesus is real. Jesus is who He says He is. I mean, I was reading this Bible. I was just like, I didn't want to put it down. I was reading it, and I remember feeling, I felt a great sense of just peace and ease and comfort, really. I knew God forgave me. I didn't know how that had happened. I was to learn later about, the redemption of Christ's blood and so on. I didn't really know. It was very, very new. But I do remember being quite frightened, because I thought, what if I go to sleep? What if I go to sleep? And when I wake up in the morning, what if God's gone? It sounds so, I mean, I was a grown-up, but I felt like a little child. Like going to bed when, sort of Father Christmas. I know it's not a very good analogy, but it's just that kind of, I was so excited and so alive and so enthusiastic just to know God. But I thought, what if it's, and I wasn't taking, I always say this, I was taking no medication, because a lot of people in those institutions are medicated. I was completely clean and sober. So it was not drug induced.
And what happened the next morning then? So you
Well,
woke up, new day?
I woke up and God was still there, and He's still there today, and He's never, I have to say, He's never, ever, 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 ever left me, ever.
And in terms of what you were in there for, so the presenting problem of alcoholism and so on, what difference did it make to that?
Well, it made a massive difference. And I mean, when I went in there, I weighed 2 stone less than I do today. I had an enlarged liver, and I was a very peculiar shade of yellow. Do you know what? The reason I'm always hesitant to share this is because what I've just shared happened to me is the miracle. That is the miracle of God's grace. But when I did come to the next morning, I'd had an enormous tummy. I looked like I was about 5 months pregnant because of the enlarged liver, and it had just reduced and returned to a normal size liver, which was but. Do you know something?
What did the medics make?
Oh, they were baffled. They were really baffled by what had happened, and they were looking at charts and thinking they'd probably made mistakes in the original kind of diagnosis or something, which, I mean, they hadn't. I didn't know what I had, but I had a tummy here, and I couldn't even pick the baby up, because if his little legs touched my tummy, the pain was immense because my liver was so swollen.
So it had gone the next day?
It had gone completely, yeah.
So you went, when you were discharged, you went home, and what was it like? So for your husband, you coming back a very different woman?
Yeah. It was, do you know something? And it sounds so strange, but it was really hard. It was really difficult, because he'd married me the way I was in 1990, and he'd experienced 5 years of what I would have thought was dreadful, but he just kept saying, I just want back the girl I married. The girl he married was a lunatic, and I couldn't seem to convey that to him, because and it was tough. I mean, life indoors with the children, I just fell in love all over again with being a mum, being a sober mum. Spending time with they were a newborn baby and a toddler and a primary school child. So I was just so blessed to still be their mum, really, still be there. So I loved being at home with the boys. My husband was delighted. He was absolutely thrilled that I wasn't drinking or taking drugs. I was sober, I was clean, I was reliable, I was dependable. He was coming home, he didn't have to worry. The home ran really well. It was orderly and functioning, but he struggled. He really struggled.
What did he make of your faith in Christ now? Did he get that at all?
He didn't. You know, I was talking to a lady just before we started called Rosemary, and I was saying that, you know, it's the hardest thing when and I was babbly because I didn't really, at that time, I knew something miraculous had happened. I knew that Jesus and God come into my life. I didn't have the right, you know, phrases and so on as you do when you mature in Christianity. But he was just apathetic. It was like he was pleased, but he wasn't angry, he wasn't resistant, he wasn't, no, he was just apathetic is the best way to describe it.
And that continued till the end?
Yeah.
So tell us what happened
Yeah, it
there.
did. Well, you know, he was a lovely man, he was a wonderful dad, great provider, and how many years after? 15 years ago, he left home one evening to play squash. He played squash a couple of times a week, and he had a massive coronary arrest on the squash court, and he died. And the boys were like 11, 12 and 17. So, so, you know, painfully sad.
How did that affect you in your faith? So as a Christian, how did you sort of process that and cope with that?
Well, I knew from that very day in the hospital that God does not owe me anything at all. God gave me life, God gave me breath, God gave me salvation that day, absolutely. And I don't, you know, presume to understand God's will, and the sadness at Paul's death was immense. I'd never really, I mean, I've never really suffered a loss of a loved one. You know, my children are still here. My mum's still alive and hearty. So it was huge. But I just, you know, I don't have to understand everything that happens to just accept that God's sovereign, and God knows what He is doing. So.
And how did you grow in your understanding? So you knew very little that bank holiday weekend. So how did you actually grow in your faith? And did you find a church somewhere?
I did, and it's interesting. I don't know how I knew, because I went and bought a Bible, and I was reading the Bible, because that's what my husband say, every time I look at you, you're reading your Bible. And I knew I wanted, I knew I had to be, I wanted to go to a church, I wanted to learn, and I went to a local church at the bottom of the road, and it was a very high Anglo-Catholic church, and quite similar to my Roman Catholic. It was very bells and smells, and I hope I don't offend anybody by that, but it was. And I tried to speak to the minister, but it was an awkward conversation. I tried to ask him some questions, and it was just very awkward, and it didn't go very well, really. But one of the children has started nursery, and at the nursery I met a really lovely lady who we just got talking, and within a couple of weeks we kind of became friendly, and it turned out she was the local Baptist minister's wife, and they asked me to their church, and I went to their church and stayed there for 23 years. I went home occasionally, but I stayed there.
And maybe just a final question, although it's not the point of the evening, but given your experience, if there was someone here who was secretly struggling with alcoholism as you were, and you know, no one else knows about it, what would you sort of recommend that they do, just from given what you've been through?
Goodness me. I think it's massively important to recognise that alcoholism is a disease, and I do say that it's an illness as much as Jesus touched lepers and blind people. You know, the alcoholism. My husband had 1, 2, 3 drinks. He yawned. He felt tired. He wanted to go home, have a soft drink, have a cup of coffee. I find that weird. I just don't get that type of drinking. I have 3 drinks. I'm omnipotent. I'm on fire. The world is just like whoa. And I mean, that was the good days. It wasn't like that in the end. but it has a very different effect on the alcoholic. The process of alcohol in the body of the alcoholic is vastly different. So I just say that because it's so important. It's not, stopping drinking is not a matter of willpower and choice. I've got massive willpower I had to do to live the life I led. And, you know, stubbornness, defiance and resilience, but none of it I threw at alcoholism. So it's that recognition that there's an element of powerlessness in me doing what I'm doing and not wanting to do it. You know, if you're happy being drunk, go be drunk. I'm not suggesting that you do, but I didn't. I was doing what I didn't want to do. I was drunk when I didn't want to be drunk. I was drinking when I didn't want to drink. I was buying drink that I didn't really like anymore, and I couldn't stop doing it. And what I would say is, if you can relate to any of that, please recognise that element of powerlessness. And there is only one power in this world. It won't be your partner, your doctor, your therapist, or anything else, a holiday, a rehab, but it is God. Invite God in to that part of your life if you're already a Christian, because Christians struggle with alcohol. I've known many true believers. And if you're not, then perhaps come to the Lord for the first time.
So is drink not a problem for you at all? So in terms of temptation involved?
No, never. No, and I'm immensely grateful for that. My boys have a normal relationship with alcohol. They can have a beer with their barbecue or a glass of wine with their meal occasionally, and it doesn't bother them, and it doesn't bother me being around it. I'm safe, protected by God.
Yvonne, thank you so much for sharing your story. Absolutely amazing. Why don't we give a round of applause?
Thank you.